In each episode of Teaching Orchestra, I'm going to have a specific section on accountability. And I think accountability is extremely important because there has to be a reason why a student is doing a certain technique. And they have to be held accountable to that technique. Otherwise, a lot of them are going to be unlikely to learn it. In rehearsal, we spend a lot of time working on the notes and the rhythms and, putting this together and that together and the balance. But unfortunately, if you don't have good technique, you're very limited into what you can really do as a musician, and you're not going to be able to advance in your playing career. You have students that are just like on the cusp of making the all-region orchestra, but not quite there, or the cusp of making the all-state orchestra, but not quite there. Well, it might not be because they didn't practice enough. It might not be because, they weren't dedicated or they didn't start early enough or whatever. It probably is because they don't have the technique to be able to play that level of difficulty and compete with the others. So in this section, I'm going to provide some accountability measures so that students can be accountable to their tone and make it to where these techniques will stick a little bit better. In looking through the string orchestra literature, grade 1 through 3 music, most students can get by with some really bad techniques and kind of play it to where it's supposed to be. But once you start getting above that, it turns into a complete disaster really quickly. You're not going to be able to play Bach if your bow is sliding all over the place. It's just not going to sound very good at all. You're not going to have a chance. And so you have to build that technique first before you can start programming pieces of music like that. And if you're entering into a competition or an evaluation that requires a certain level of difficulty in music, then your goal is to have them learn those techniques at the beginning of the year and have that technique fairly well established before you start working on the advanced literature. So in the classroom, I think a really great level of accountability is peer-to-peer coaching. It's difficult for a teacher, especially if you don't have an assistant, you're all by yourself, you're spread really thin in these large classes, and having the students critique each other in a beneficial way, that can really hold themselves accountable to each other and help fix some of their technique issues. So the easiest way to do this is just like you divide divisi. You could do inside outside with basses. You just alternate or something like that. If you don't have stand partners, you can do it by row. To where it's the person sitting next to you. You could do even number row, odd number rows, and just get them to where they know who their coaching buddy is, and that way they know who to watch and who's going to play. It's important that when you're using peer-to-peer coaching, that you give the coach things to look for. Are they doing this? Are they doing that? Are they doing this third thing? And you want them to be able to look for those things and then communicate that. If you leave them to their own devices, they may not know what they're looking for, and they might come up with all sorts of crazy stuff to say. So you're just giving them things to watch. They're going to watch for those things, and they're going to critique them, and they're going to see if they're improving the next time around. It's also important for your students to remember that they're not going to learn a skill just in one session. It's going to take them time to develop. So did they learn anything? Are they getting a little bit better? Are they a little bit more comfortable with it? Does it look a little bit better? That's what we want, is progressive growth over time, because some of these techniques take months to learn, if not years to learn. And so we're just looking for a little bit of more growth and understanding. We also need to make sure that our coaching comments are constructive. Stick to the facts, stick to what you see, and just say, yeah, you're doing this well. Yeah, you're doing this a little bit better. Or no, you're not. Don't add things. It's not good for the environment. You just don't do that. And this is also why at the bottom of our hierarchy, values is the foundation. Because if the students have good values and they know why they're doing what they're doing, and they know what the program stands for and what they stand for in the program, that's going to make them a very good coach, because they want everybody in the orchestra to sound great. We want every student in our orchestra to feel supported and to feel valued. And to do that, make sure that your values are in place. I know that takes class time, and you have to define the values and explain certain things to them, explain certain comments and stuff, but it really helps with your peer-to-peer coaching. And if you're going to use this as an accountability measure, which I think saves a lot of time, it will pay off in the end. While the students are critiquing each other, you want to make sure that you're actively walking around the orchestra. You can hear what's going on so that you can kind of manage if you hear things getting out of hand. And you also want to watch out for the too nice coaches. The coaches are like, oh, that's great. Yeah, oh, you're doing everything wonderfully. Well, guess what? If you're not helping them fix their problems, they're not going to get better, and you're going to be playing with somebody in your orchestra with suboptimal technique. So in the demonstration videos that's going to follow this segment, there's going to be examples of how to do this and how I do this in the classroom. So you can watch those and kind of get an idea for what to do. You know, since I've been doing this in the classroom, I found this to be very interesting because the students who are observing and coaching end up learning more than the students that are performing the activity. And it's because they see the mistake happen and they see how that mistake gets fixed, and then they learn from it. I think as a species, we've got this great ability to learn from each other. And our ancestors, you know, we saw Grok the caveman going out and eating the red berries, and then Grok fell over dead, and then we just didn't eat those red berries. Or to be more accurate, the cavemen and women who ate the berries also died, and they didn't pass on their genes. So that over time, the people who were observing and learning from each other's mistakes were able to make civilization as we know it today. So over time, the people that were able to learn from mistakes of others were able to thrive, and you know, those are the people who made us, you know, the way we are today. And not all animals are like that. You know, the lemmings that just jump off the cliff, you know, and the birds that just keep flying into the window. You know, we're special and we can learn from each other. And so that's why I really like peer-to-peer coaching. Some of the skill building exercises also really help to build accountability. You know, your windshield wipers, your bow push-ups, you know, your string wiggles, you know, your long bows. Those are some things that you can do to create accountability, to make it to where they have to play with the right technique or they can't do the skill. To create accountability, I also really like the freeze, observe, then fix approach. Because when they freeze and they observe, they're being held accountable to that mistake when they fix it. If you say freeze and they're still moving around fixing it while they're supposed to be freezing it, that takes away from the accountability. So make sure they freeze. There's some interesting tools out there that can help solve some issues, like bow buddies, for instance. You know, they kind of you detach the frog and throw it on there, and you know, they've got the frog for the violins and violas, and they've got like the elephant for the cellos and bass players. And I've never been able to teach a beginning class with bow buddies before. We just haven't ever had that in the budget. But it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see what it was like to where it just solved all of your bow problems, and you could just, you know, it creates accountability because you can't hold your bow wrong if you're using one of those things. They also have these like bow guides that kind of strap underneath the instrument, and they have like rails that are in between the bridge and the fingerboard, so that your bow kind of is held accountable to the guide. It kind of keeps it in there, you know, so that you can't really get it out of whack too much. Although I don't really like that as well, because I feel like teaching the students grip is really important, and if they're using something like that, it doesn't work quite as well. So maybe if you have a student that just isn't getting that concept of grip, and you know, you're having to have a little bit of accountability and help for like maybe one student in your class at a time, that might be appropriate. You know, how do we create accountability for rosining our bows? Well, you can do some bowing exercises on the cake of rosin. You know, you can do some long bows, you can do some rhythm exercises, you can do a lot of things just on the rosin cake, and gets rosin on their bow that way. Sometimes it gets too much rosin on the bow, so make sure you have a cleaning cloth and you can wipe some of it off so that it doesn't get all over the instrument. And I think you also need to be accountable for the care of your instrument and making sure that you wipe your strings when you're done, especially if you're using a school instrument. And that's kind of where I step in and create accountability, because if you're going to use one of my school instruments, then you need to take care of it. So again, we want to be able to ask the question of what skills do we need in order to play with good tone, what sequence should we teach them in, And then we have to be able to figure out what's working and what's not working through a troubleshooting process. And finally, we have to have some accountability measures to make sure that students are accountable for learning all of these techniques, because we don't want students to slip through the cracks. If they're not being successful in orchestra, if they don't feel like they're making a good sound, or if they feel like they're falling behind the others, those are the students that are probably not going to stay in your program, and it's going to hurt with your retention. So it's good to hold everybody accountable and create skills, create exercises, create processes that make your students do it the right way, so that there's no chance that they can't do it the wrong way. You make it to where, okay, if you want to do a bow push-up, you've got to have a decent bow hold. You've got to be able to, if you want to wiggle that string, okay, well, now you've got grip. Let's do a windshield wiper. Let's just look at it visually and see what's going on here. And then you've got your freeze, observe, fix method. You've got your peer-to-peer coaching. There's a lot of layers that you can put in place, because some accountability measures are going to work better for other students. Some are going to respond differently to different techniques. And so your goal is just to try to catch every fish in the net, and that means you got to have a pretty big net. So I hope some ideas that I've given you are going to make your teaching more successful by giving your students accountability. And in the next video, we're going to have some demonstration exercises on how to teach tone, and that's going to be consistent for all these videos. We're going to have some ideas about what to do in your classroom. So stay tuned for those.